Hello and welcome back to WhitTips. Today I've got my hard hat on and my tools out, which can mean only one thing, and that is we are looking at the structure question for AQA English Language Paper 1, Question 3. So this question never ever changes if you did your exam in 2019 or you do your exam next year in 2021. See what I did there? Then the question will be exactly the same, and the question reads like this. How does the writer structure the text to interest you as a reader? It's worth 8 marks, and you get the following 3 bullet points with it as well, where they say you could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So what is structure then? Sometimes we fall into a trap of thinking that structure is something more difficult than what it actually is. Put simply, structure is how a writer puts a text together. Your teachers might refer to that in different ways. They might tell you it's how a writer builds a text or constructs the text, hence the hard helmet and the tools from before, and it's all about construction. Or it's about the order of a text, how a text is put together in a particular order for you. Any of these definitions work. Simply, structure is about how the writer takes different components, events, characters, actions, words, thinking about where they start with a particular story, where they're going to stop with a particular story, and everything that's in the middle there, that every choice that they make and everything that they choose to tell you, whether they introduce a certain topic at a certain time or change that setting, or have a character walk through a different door, or have a character suddenly start to grin, all those choices that writers make are very important. They are structural choices, and it's up to us in this question to try and pick those out, to deconstruct that text, to take it apart brick by brick and understand how it's gone together for what effect. To help us think about a text in that way then, 5 simple words for you that you will all be well aware of: who, what, where, when, why. And in that particular order, I think, is important as well, especially the why at the end, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the who, what, where, and when, and why, if you were asked to write a story, then you will probably have to make these decisions. Okay, so who am I going to write a story about? What's going to happen? Where shall I set it? When am I going to set it? Okay, when is the action going to take place? They're all quite big, important questions that a writer has to ask themselves before they start writing. And again, for this question, we have to go back and we have to take those apart and try and understand how a writer's got to that complete finished text and what that effect is. Okay, because these are all the hows. The why is the important one. If you aspire to get over half marks on this question, if you aspire to get 5, 6, 7, or 8 out of 8, then you've got to go into particular detail of the why. And like I said, we'll talk about that in a second. So if we continue to think about these 5 words, then we can start to develop them. So as I've said, who is telling us the story and who is in the story? That's an important couple of questions to ask yourself. What is happening in terms of action and events? Okay. Where is this action taking place? So is it in a particular location or setting? When is it happening? Okay, we can think about that in terms of past, present, future. We can think about that in terms of time of day. We can think about that in terms of season or month. There are also important things. And like we said, that important one, why is the writer doing this? And again, how do they want us to feel? The question asks us how the writer structures the text to interest us. We're interested by our feelings. Start to think about what the purpose of the reader is, and you'll start to improve your answers and your understandings of text. That's the important thing. It's not just about exams sometimes, but as you read for understanding, trying to think about what the agenda of the writer is. Okay, we can turn these 5 W words, if you will, into some terminology for us now. If you have a look at this, the who is telling us the story and who is in the story become 2 key words for us: the narrator and the character. So the narrator is the person that's telling us the story. We need to know who that is. It might change our opinion to know that we're reading a story told to us by a child or we're reading a story told to us perhaps by somebody from a certain place or a certain point in time. So the narrator is important, or a certain gender. And again, characters, who's in it, that's an important thing that somebody's got to make as well. Are the characters fundamentally good or bad? Okay, that type of thing is an important thing to consider. What becomes plot? Okay, so what could become action or plot, but plot really are the events. Okay, we think about plotting a graph. Okay, a writer will plot the events that's going to happen, and you will all have seen perhaps tension graphs in lessons where you can see that something's building to some kind of resolution. Okay, so kind of this idea is an introduction of a problem, some kind of climax, and then some kind of resolution. Okay, where becomes the setting of the text. Where is this action taking place? All about settings. And again, think about those bullet points. What changes? Okay, so if the setting changes at any particular point of time, then we're interested, why has the writer made that decision to structurally alter what we're reading? Why change setting at this point? Or why change the setting that we're in? And how have they changed the setting that we're in? Again, when becomes all about time. So that's quite an important thing for us. Flashing forward, flashing back, do times change? It's, as well as when it's set as well, you need to think about how a writer uses time. And in terms of time, do they deliver it in a particular timely way, in a chronological way, or is that altered in some way? Okay. And the last one that we've said, why, and I've already used this word, is all about the purpose. If you can understand the writer's purpose, so for example, if they're writing a horror text, then the purpose might be to frighten us, to scare us. If they're writing a romantic text, well, it might be about trying to pull on our heartstrings a little bit. It might try to make us feel sad if that love is unrequited, or really, really happy and overjoyed if that love is returned. So think about the purpose of a text, of a scene. Okay, you can go right down to thinking about the purpose of a particular word, and they will all help you improve your English no end. If you can think and try and understand about the purpose and the agenda of the writer, then you'll do very well in your English language exams. Just to take this a step further, then, we can try and think about this in terms of a metaphor. Behind every text is a writer. Okay, so you can imagine the writer as a kind of puppet master. We don't really see them. Okay, we know they're there subconsciously. When we pick up a book, we know that before that book's got to us, a writer has had to compose it. Okay, but we don't really see them. We do see their characters, we do see the words, we do see the physical artifact of a book. Okay, and all those things produce a reaction in us. Sometimes it's a different reaction to what the writer intended, but more often than not, we have the reaction that the writer wants us to have, whether that is to really like root for Harry Potter, for example, or to really hate Lord Voldemort. Then that's the reaction that the writer's trying to get, and normally we get that out. Okay, so we need to think about why the writer wants us to feel or react in that particular way. Okay, so that's an important thing for us, and to help us think about that, we can think of ourselves as the other characters as kind of puppets, and us having a particular reaction. So I've put a word in there which is quite useful for you. The writer, and then I've left it blank, manipulates the reader into feeling what? Okay, so maybe a strategy for this is if you can understand and take a step back and think about, right, I've just read this extract or this text, this full text. What is the overall impact of this upon me? And then how is it created? Okay, so before you go into the how, you have to think about what is the overall impact? What is the purpose? How am I, the reader, feeling through all these things that I've just read and how it's been set out and laid out and constructed before me? The third bullet point is about the other structural features that might take your interest. And in future videos, we will have a look at some of these more specific structural features, but other things that you can look out for are beginnings and endings, and thinking about how a text starts off and where it finishes, and if there's been a change in anything from the beginning to the end of the text. We've talked a little bit about narrator already, but we can start to think about narrative perspective and how who's telling us the text changes our opinion on it. Can we trust them, for example? Can we not? Other things that we can spot are things like repetition of objects, significant objects perhaps, or repetition of certain ideas, any sort of motifs, so these symbols that keep reappearing throughout a text, any sort of threads or patterns and things developing. Does the writer keep going back to something, or is a writer hinting at something that is yet to come, perhaps, which links us into introductions. So when we think about introductions, again, at what point in a text does a writer choose to introduce to us a new character or a new setting, and why? We need to think about why. Why at that point does that person come through that door? Why at that point does a character perhaps light a cigarette, for example, or something along those lines? And how things develop, very important as well. So how does a character change throughout a text? Does the character's emotions change? Do their actions change? What does that reveal about them? Do the settings change? Okay, does the weather within the setting change? Okay, is there any sort of development within that? Are there any shifts of focus? Does the writer start by telling us something and then shift our focus to something else? Are we focusing on a character and then suddenly we switch to another character, or do we switch to look at and focus on something else, another object within that scene? So how does the writer control our focus on what the writer is showing us at each point in that book or in that extract? And the last one is any sort of movement that we have. So movement from internal to external. Suddenly is the writer describing a scene for us and then takes us within inside a character's head so we can see their thoughts? Do we get to see inside every character's head? That depends upon the narrative perspective. Any ideas of movement from big to small, for example? So do we suddenly go from perhaps thinking about how a character reacts to a situation to thinking about the bigger situation itself? Okay, so you might be imagining a war scene, for example, and you've got this one character's reaction to war, but around them then is this bigger concept of war and how damaging that can be to society. So do you see any movements at all from that, or do you start off with something big as a battlefield and then it narrows down, it zooms in, it hones in to that one character's experience of war? So look out for those type of different structural features, and like I say, we'll do future videos where we talk through each of these in a little bit more detail and try to apply them to the text. And don't forget the idea that behind each one of these there is a writer manipulating you, choosing when to reveal these things, introduce these things, repeat these things, change these things for you as a reader, and they're always making that choice, and it always has some kind of effect for us, whether it delays what we want to find out, changes the way that we feel about a particular character, or the setting might change our mood and how we feel about the text overall. Each one of these features will have a specific effect. So, some tips for the structure question for you. When reading the full extract, can you try and make sure that you make some kind of notes in the margin to try and help you build up that text? So can you note down what's happening as like a tiny little running commentary? And again, 1 or 2 words maximum. Try and keep it quite short, so you've got something to deal with. Try and think about your reaction to the text. So as you read a paragraph, you might put down how you felt. And can you track that emotion? Does it change at any point? Most of the GCSE text that you were given will be edited by an examiner, and they will contain some kind of change within there. So can you spot that change as a big question point for the exam? So does it suddenly go from a happy tone to a sad tone? Does it go from a fearful tone to perhaps a more hopeful tone? Okay, so try and track those emotions and feelings through a text as well. As you're reading, just be jotting down things that you feel in the margin. Before you start writing, and this links in, think about what is that overall effect of the text. What does the writer want you to feel having read the complete thing? Okay, so what is the overriding emotion? And it might be different for different people, and that's where English is slightly subjective, because what you read and what you feel might be slightly different to somebody else. It doesn't mean that you're wrong, but then say, how have you got to that feeling? You're going to keep kind of going back to that as a kind of an argument and say, this is the overall effect of the text. This is how I'm interested because I feel fearful at this point, or I feel happy and joyous at this point, and you can keep going back to it. Make sure you cover the whole of the text. That's very important. The bullet points direct you to the beginning of the text, but to understand the full text, you must reference the end. and you must get to the end in your analysis. It's quite a short question, this one. It's only 8 marks, so you won't be spending too many minutes on it, and you must make sure that you cover the entirety of the text to get, like I say, above those half marks. Linking into that, beginning and endings, connecting ideas together is very important. Connecting ideas, connecting the text, and connecting structural features. If you're spotting the patterns and you're tracking something through a text, then how does that potentially change? So you can group all that together into one piece of analysis, and try, rather than work your way, and this is where sometimes students get bogged down, chronologically through the text and think, right, I'm going to start by saying what happens at the beginning, and students spend too long talking about the beginning of the text without making any reference to how the beginning then links to the middle or to the end, or how the object that they've talked about in the beginning, maybe the narrator, then changes or develops as the text goes on. Okay, so you've got to make sure in quite a short amount of time that you've got to write your response to this, that you're moving your way through the text. Okay, and the only way you'll get to do that is to keep practicing and looking at different texts and thinking, what would I say about that, and keep practicing those questions. That's why your mocks and your PPEs are very, very important for you in school, because they give you a chance to practice that.